Hello, everyone.
Hey there, Steve.
Hey, guys.
So tonight, I'm kind of the host, but it's going to be pretty much open because we are going to review and listen to a speech or address that Dr. Stephen Baskerville made at the International Conference on Men's Issues. He's been around kind of adjacent to this sphere for quite a while. He's more of in the men's rights activism side of things. And he wrote a book in 2007 called Taken into Custody about how fathers fare in family courts. And so he's a professor, teaches political stuff, and concentrates on radical movements or ideologies. And so he's approaching, his worldview comes from that, and modernity or post-modernity, feminism. He's approaching it from that standpoint. So his video or address is 38 minutes long. We may interrupt it a couple times. Either you guys want to, or if we want to say something, we will. He brings in a lot of things. So I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but it is worth consideration.
Do we always agree with everything that we all say?
No, but everybody has to kind of say that, right?
Right.
Because I'm not adopting his views, although his views might be very similar to mine.
Well, and he might say some things that I disagree with, because you mentioned he talks about Ukraine in here. Yeah, we'll see what he has to say. There's some things going on there that we have to remember, that when we're dealing with subject matter experts, they're not experts on everything.
That's right. So, Plutarch, you want to start it?
All right. The audio hasn't started yet, but let me know if you can hear
Good
it.
day.
I can hear it.
Before I start, I want to apologize for my lack of professionalism when it comes to recording this. I'm using some equipment. I bought a new microphone so I would sound better, and I've tried to fix the lights so you can see my face better. Maybe that helps. Right in my eyes. But I'm doing my best, so I apologize. I might have to stop the video from time to time to make sure that it's actually recording properly and things like that. So please bear with me. I'd also like to say just a couple of words about my qualifications for speaking here today. I'm currently a professor of politics. My talk today is the culmination of a career of about 40 years, working at universities in the United States and Europe. And I've written about 5 books and hundreds of articles on the subject that connected with what I will talk about today. That may not mean a lot to you. One reader commented about one of my articles. He said that Baskerville is the world's preeminent academic, although with all due respect, that's not saying much these days. In any case, I would like to, for purposes of this talk, I want to emphasize one qualification in particular, and that is that I've spent most of my career studying radical political ideologies. And I think you will see why that is relevant to the subject today. I think in many ways our plight, both as men and fathers on the one hand, and our larger problems as Western society boils down to the influence of radical ideologies. I should also start by saying that I never preach to the converted. I will not recite the injustices to men or the horrors visited upon fathers in family courts. I've done that elsewhere, and so have many others. It is important that we be informed about what is going on by people who have the time to research it and interpret it properly. But beyond a point, dwelling on the unfairness of the world and attacking the bad people and dwelling on one's victimhood, this serves no constructive purpose. At some point, we have to start doing something about it, and that's what I will concentrate on here today. I think the Men's Fathers movement greatly underestimates its own power. I think we could be much more effective than we are.
I pause
The
right
main
there.
problem.
That's not just that group that he mentioned. That's the entire kind of red pill, and also kind of like the church patriarchy movement. If they actually get off their butts and do something based on their own theology, they put their own theology into practice for the good of society. Same thing with red pill. You could just use it to sleep with women, but you could also use it to help other men. The same books that many have read have helped men navigate some pretty disastrous family situations, divorces, custody, etc. And a lot of these guys have courses out there in the RP community.
Yeah, there's a growing number of people and different spheres that are addressing the same issue.
Yeah.
And even the marriage strike, or the so-called marriage strike, of young men who know nothing about any of this, just saying, I'm not going to get married. They are a big supportive element that can be tapped into, or will just act independently to force things. And I think that's what will come out in this.
I think the last thing that they want is people to unite around a common cause.
Well, it always benefits people in power to keep the people because there's never that many people in power, and so when you have a lot of people who could, we talked about this in our polygamy stream. What ends up happening to the polygamists? They get killed by the men who don't have power, who don't have women. It's the same kind of mentality for this thing here. Even if you're talking about people who have no connection to the red pill, it's why they had to come up with that other term that we're not far enough in yet for me to say about certain involuntary people, right? They need to keep those people aren't associated with the red pill. You can't say that they're red pill. You can't say that they're men's rights activists. You can't say any of that about those people. They're just people who are choosing not to do what the system needs them to do. And they don't react and they don't understand that these people are just reacting to what the system is doing to them. And that's part of why we're here in this with this channel, I think, is we're less interested in whining about the way things are than saying, okay, what do we do now? What do we do next?
Yep. Let's continue.
The problem is that we often focus on our own grievances rather than the larger harm to society. I believe we must take the moral high ground. The key to overcoming our plight is to show the world that the destruction of men and masculinity is also destroying our entire civilization. It is rapidly eroding the freedom of everyone, and the rest of the world must be made to see that they have an important stake in helping us rectify these unjust and destructive policies. That is the topic of my new book, Who Lost America? On the face of it, it is a book about current American politics, not men's rights. The title and opening pages give no indication that it has anything to do with men's issues. But it analyzes the crisis of the last 4 years in the United States. This was a period when the extreme left, in alliance with financially powerful people, staged what amounts to a coup d'etat and seized control of the US government, with other governments following. The book asks, why did this happen? Why was this allowed to happen? I examined various accounts written by various commentators, some very good, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, Douglas McGregor. These inform us in detail of what happened, and the best ones frame it in terms that emphasize the importance for our freedom and our civilization. But even the best accounts invariably end on a note of frustration and even despair, because they can't account for why it happened. Many accounts, less good accounts, provide pointless and repetitive detail about events and repeat these events over and over long after everyone knows them. And the events that I have in mind, just to list them briefly, I think most people know them, but the fact that so many crises have come together at one point is really the issue here. The engineered COVID epidemic, the mandatory and deadly vaccines, the riots following the death of George Floyd in summer 2020, led by Black Lives Matter and Antifa, open borders, economic stimulation and resulting inflation, censorship imposed by social media companies on their own customers under pressure from the federal government, politicization of the FBI, CIA, and other law enforcement and security agencies, rigged elections, mass arrests and serious civil liberties violations, sexualization and physical mutilation of children, measures to control and bankrupt farmers, and finally the war in Ukraine. And there may be others that you have that you could list, but you get the idea. Okay. A few explanations are offered for these policies. They're attributed to the machinations of powerful men and women. Some suggest we have fallen into a kind of mass psychosis. These various explanations are often dismissed as conspiracy theories. Now we know that many of the so-called conspiracy theories have turned out to be true. Yet even so, the machinations of rich and powerful people do not explain why they succeed. The larger point is that dwelling on the deeds of villains seldom provides any constructive remedy. My argument is that the current destruction of freedom in America is being engineered by the same government machinery that has long been oppressing parents and their children. The freedom of Americans is being curtailed by a government machinery that learned its methods and techniques largely by eliminating the freedom and constitutional rights of fathers, sometimes mothers, in the welfare and divorce system.
Stop there. So that's basically his thesis statement.
I would say so, yeah.
So that's his prime goal, prime argument that he's trying to argue is that, I think all the causes that, I don't want to say all the causes, but a lot of the causes that basically we are experiencing in this basic crazy world that we live in is you can find its root cause in the radicalization and how the government dealt with particularly mostly fathers, I guess, in the marriage court system.
Well, and
Yeah.
I want to say something here is that people think, oh, it's this grand conspiracy. Probably not. What you have, and if you go way back to a video where we included Yuri Bezmenov, and I don't think I got this clip in there, but he mentions that when you invade the public school system, as was done, particularly during the 60s and 70s, and you force it to indoctrinate people in a certain way, all those people tend to believe the same things. And people who believe the same things are going to act in very similar ways. So there's no need for a grand conspiracy when everyone already believes the same things. They're going to act in ways that try to make those things come true. They're not.
Well,
Go ahead.
Oh, it's like you introduce one factor to protect an unnatural abomination, and then is there any wonder or question that it shouldn't keep spreading because you're trying to protect this one root cause, and it starts. The more you protect that cause, you have to enact more and more false, unnatural measures against basically the most fundamental unit of civilization and society, which is the family.
Well, I'm going to say there is a grand conspiracy.
Uh-oh.
Simple though. Divide and conquer.
No, you mean the oldest conspiracy in history?
Yeah, if you want to rule everybody, you got to conquer them. How do you
Oh.
conquer them? You divide them. How do you divide them? Well, first of all, you start to indoctrinate and remove some of the foundational pieces of civilization. And now people are separated and they're easier to control as individuals than as groups.
Is
That's-
this how we find who the enemy is? Or do we
Mm.
still
Well, the enemy is an amorphous blob of NPCs, but no, I think this is more people, particularly well-intentioned idiots, tend to believe that the only consequences of their actions will be the consequences that they want to happen. And I mean, we were talking about the birth rate on Monday, and it's like, what did you think, that people were just going to react the way you wanted them to react? Like, you know, we talk about psychological manipulation, and you know, some people believe conspiracy theories about, you know, mind control. It's not really mind control, but what the reason this stuff inevitably fails is not because those things don't necessarily work on the masses. They do. It's because the people who conceive them were so blinded by their ideology and their belief that they were going to make a better world that they didn't see the unintended consequences of it. There's actually if you ever seen the movie Serenity,
Yeah.
Firefly.
Mhm.
That's actually like a running plot point for the whole movie, is this idea that the government could create this better world through the introduction of, in this case, it was a chemical agent that suppressed people's aggression, and it suppressed their aggression so much that they just laid down, went to sleep, and decided to just die right there. It's that kind of thing. It's like you didn't foresee the consequences of your own actions because you were so caught up in the ideology and belief that you could make a better human.
And can you? I mean, think about this. All the engineers and people who did were in the Apollo space program accomplished astounding things.
Mm-hmm.
They were all educated prior to the Department of Education, which was formed by Jimmy Carter.
Mm-hmm.
So he was elected in '76. So,
Yep.
who was after that? And they didn't have much diversity there. There wasn't any DEI. There wasn't much politically correct stuff going on. But there was a lot of really, really smart engineers educated in the 60s and early 70s. Well, in the 60s, because those guys were all seasoned guys when they were in the Apollo space program. The engineers, I mean.
I was going to say, the engineers, most of the Apollo engineers, they actually cut their teeth designing weapons of war for World War II.
Yeah. So, how are you going to improve upon that caliber of engineers? Well, they tried. We couldn't do that. We don't have that caliber today. Telling you that.
And we tried by trying to say, oh, well, we're going to impose nationwide standards on how to teach kids. And yet, homeschool kids tend to absolutely dominate standardized testing.
Now, I'm not saying that there are not individuals of that caliber.
Sure.
But the quantity is vastly smaller.
Well, because there's two things that are required in order to be an individual of that caliber. First, you have to have the raw IQ. We believe in IQ here, so you have to have the raw intelligence to pull this off. Then you have to have the drive to pull it off. Only then does who your teachers are and what they teach you matter.
And you need the discipline. the
Yep.
foundation, which kind of comes from the family. So
Yep.
we can't do
And
that today.
So add discipline before you get to teachers. Teachers are like the fourth thing on the list of relevant factors to how good you are at something. Like I had good teachers when I was in school, but we had this really cool thing up here where my parents could actually, if they couldn't teach something, they could go to a special school, and they had all the teachers for all the different various topics there. Like my mom couldn't teach us chemistry, so we went and did we had a chem teacher there, and we took classes, for example. But I was homeschooled up until I went to college. I went to college at the age of 16.
Hmm.
Okay. Why? Because I floated through the college entrance exam at 16.
Right.
And we have a program that allows you to do your last 2 years of high school as college in my state. So yeah, great. But the thing that got me in the college, I mean, yes, Mom, love you, but I still remember our battles over math, but she eventually just gave up and put me in a math class at that school. Even your mom isn't necessarily going to be the best teacher for everything, but she will tell you that from a very young age, I had an interest in computers and doing stuff. And my mom and my dad were both involved enough in my life to say, you know what, this kid's got an aptitude for this. We should make sure he has access to the tools to learn it. And by 12 years old, I was taking lessons in how to write programs for computers. That didn't come from the teachers.
No.
So anyway, I can ramble and diatribe on this a bit. It is something I firmly believe in, but the kid for it to work. I had the drive to do it. I wanted to do it. I was interested in it, but expecting that most kids out there are going to be that way, I think we're asking a little much when the school system can barely get them up to a 6th grade reading level, struggles to get them out of arithmetic. Right.
Right.
The school system is not going to make the way it's set up now is not going to make these kids into what the Apollo engineers were.
No. Well,
So-
especially with like the latest, governmental controls and idiocy that they've done in public education. So there you go.
Yeah. Do you guys want me to speed this up a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. We'll just do that.
This illustrates an old principle that we have been warned about but tried to ignore, and we ignore it to our cost. That injustice and tyranny cannot be confined to one sector of the population, and it cannot be quarantined from everyone else. Either it must be eradicated or it will expand and spread itself to engulf the entire society. This warning has been issued in many times, in many forms. It was the principle behind Abraham Lincoln's classic House Divided speech about slavery. The most famous recent formulation was by Martin Luther King, speaking of segregation. He said, quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," end quote. By allowing such a flagrant system of oppression to fester for years, Americans made the destruction of their own freedom inevitable. I can outline the reasons here only briefly, but further elaboration can be found in my book. It is important to remember that lamenting and bemoaning convinces no one and provides no relief. Deploring moral decline, loss of Judeo-Christian faith, breakdown of the family, erosion of civic virtue, these vague cliches may all be true, but they demonstrate nothing. Even less do they provide any remedy. We can only understand what is happening to us by demonstrating the precise lines of cause and effect. Only then will we see how to extricate ourselves from this fiasco. And some of these are quite concrete and tangible and easily demonstrated. I will prove my argument with 7 concrete examples, 7 critical techniques that were pioneered mostly against male parents, but that are now being used against everyone.
Okay, so that
Number one,
he has his thesis, and now he's numbering his sub points to prove his
Yeah.
thesis.
So these are the 7 points that support his thesis statement that we talked about a few minutes ago.
He's approaching this as an academic, like
Yep.
a true
Yeah, I
academic.
noticed this. That's why I'm like, oh, yeah, it sounds familiar.
The uniparty. Number 2, news blackouts. Number 3, the deep state, the administrative state. Number 4, lawfare operations. Number 5, sexual accusations. Number 6, politicized children. And number 7, the forever wars. I'll take one at a time. Number 1, the uniparty. Many now complain that Democrats and Republicans collude to implement tyrannical policies that oppress and enslave ordinary Americans. This leaves no opposition to criticize government policy, limit government power, or hold government officials to account. Without opposition, government becomes unlimited and tyrannical, constitutional rights are ignored, and democracy dies. This is intensified during the last 4 years as the Biden administration is supported by Republicans in its most unjust, authoritarian, and reckless policies. But the uniparty did not begin only 4 years ago. In fact, its first major operation was the divorce and child custody industry, whose abuses it consistently refuses to acknowledge or investigate and adamantly refuses to reform. Democrats profess to uphold constitutional rights and civil liberties. Republicans loudly proclaim their support for the family. Yet both parties actively and willfully destroy precisely the values and institutions that they promise to the voters they will protect and preserve.
Stop right there.
This is
He's nailing it right there.
I like that too.
Both of these parties are feminist. Both of these parties are against men.
To their core.
Absolutely.
So the uniparty exists.
Well, Rachel Wilson actually brought up this point when she was on the Tim Pool. We were dealing with other stuff when we looked at that, but she brought up this point. Trump was in 2020 during the whole and COVID thing. She was like, "Oh, he was like, "Oh, we got to get the moms back to work," and she was like, "Wait, what?"
No.
This is Trump. This is a supposed savior of the country. My dude. No. You want to save the countries. I'm gonna say this. You got to get the women out of the workforce.
Yeah. I mean, do what you can, practically speaking, but yeah, ultimately, you need to try to address the root causes.
especially striking in the role reversals of not only the Democratic and Republican parties, but the larger political classes of left and right. Leftist Democrats have become the plutocrats and militarists and even racists that they used to hate and attack. And conservative Republicans do not just tolerate the policies of radical feminism they claim to abhor, they actively promote radical feminists and give them prominent platforms in the media. Naomi Wolf is only the most obvious example, as Janice Fiamingo has pointed out, but there are others. I think I can take this off. I think I need this. Number 2, news blackouts. Complaints have also intensified that the media no longer do their jobs to hold government officials to account, and that on the contrary, they serve as propagandists for authoritarian and reckless policies. No meaningful debate has taken place in the public media over matters as serious as the origins of the COVID virus, the lockdown policies and so-called vaccines, open borders, civil liberties, violations, and lawfare operations, and the war in Ukraine. Excuse me. Yet fathers know that this is nothing new. For years, the liberal and conservative media have averted their eyes and held their tongues as the corrupt divorce and child custody machinery destroys families throughout the country and with it, the society itself. In fact, the media of both.
I want to stop and make a point here. And I don't know if he's going to make it in the future, but because I'm coming at this cold. Nick's watched this before. This is kind of how I'm doing my reaction. But the point he's making here about how the media has ignored this stuff for a long time, I think it's actually a key point, because he's trying to say, look, what the media is doing right now is nothing new. You're just now starting to notice it.
It's a massive gaslighting.
Right. And the media they shape the narrative on the basis primarily of what they choose to tell you and what they choose not to tell you. you don't know that there's a massive problem with divorce and custody and all of that. And Nick, I don't know how much of your story you want to talk about because you're going through this right now.
Well, I'm actually pretty much done. I am officially divorced. So,
Oh,
as of, yeah.
congratulations.
But you can see Steve Sandman's and my story over on Pearl's channel. That's Pearly Things. We told our story over there, so you guys are free to look at it. So
Yeah. But I really want to draw this out and state this clearly. This has been going on for a long time. The media that you grew up with, that you thought was giving you the truth, they probably haven't done that since Cronkite retired. And maybe not even since then, because I see Steve laughing back there. But like, I'm trying to give you guys an example of how many decades we're talking about since the media actually reported in something resembling an unshaded manner.
and Plutarch, I'm gonna give a comment here. You'll reckon I mentioned this name before. So this guy back in the 70s and 80s, he did the La Aubrey Fellowship. He was one of the Presbyterian Christian apologists. His name was Francis Schaeffer. He wrote a book. He wrote a book, and he had a movie, How Shall We Then Live? And he talked about how media controlled and shaped the message. And you only got to see what they showed you. And they could frame a story that actually and objectively said something else to mean something totally different.
Yep.
Yeah, true.
And wait, that movie, what was that, the 90s, I think?
No, it's I think the video series came out early 80s. How Shall We
okay.
Then Live? Yeah.
So before I was born then.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So I mean, Cronkite was still around in the early 80s, but I mean, the way that part of why we do the Exposing the Narrative series is because of these problems. And I'm not going to sit here and say that, we are completely unbiased people. Clearly we have a bias. We put it in, the description of our group, but I was thinking about this morning. We have a Slavish, possibly religious devotion to the truth around here. Now, based on things Nick said, a religious devotion to the truth could just be called Christianity in its proper form. So, that might fit, but we are not afraid of tumbling and struggling with ideas that scare us. And that's where the society is going to have to go in the future. Go ahead, Stephen.
I was just thinking back. How far back does this go? A lot of people say it goes back hundreds of years. But I'll say something more recent. The John Birch Society. We don't hear much about that today, but historically, there were a bunch of ultra conservatives. It was kind of came about when they were after the commie scare and all that, but a lot of people think that they were somewhat controlled opposition and actually started to funnel people into that area and group them together, but they didn't accomplish anything. I mean, it's debatable. It's always been debatable. You could even debate this now. My mind is made up, but everybody's mind is made up on this issue. Either that it's happening or it's not happening. I'm not going to convince anybody.
Well, Dabney, in his book, Defense of Virginia in the South, yeah, he mentioned media controls before they had television on the publishing industry on the war between the states. So that's all I'll say on that.
Parties actively support the destruction. This is where they learned how to ignore the abuses of power that today are occurring on a much larger scale against everyone. Number 3, the deep state. There is much talk and fear these days about the deep state. But if the deep state is defined as powerful people using impersonal bureaucracies to control and manipulate the private lives of millions of powerless but non-criminal people, then the original deep state is the welfare state. While people conveniently think of the deep state as the operations of law enforcement and security agencies, it was the welfare state that created the model, and its operations have been even more repressive for much longer. As the name suggests, the welfare state functions as a complete state within a state. It operates its own secret police, a plainclothes gendarmerie consisting of social workers armed with police powers, child protective services, domestic violence machinery, and child support enforcement. And the welfare state operates its own extensive archipelago of secret tribunals, the notorious family courts. It was from here that the practices spread to the larger judiciary and machinery of criminal justice and security, the FBI, CIA, Homeland Security, and beyond.
One
Number
whole
4,
tyrannical
welfare.
machine.
It is.
Yep. That's when I publicly sent that letter to ministers regarding a Jezebel judge in South Dakota, and you can say others. Well, I will not obey your unlawful tyrannical decrees. Resistance to tyrants is obedience unto God. They have no right to remove the father's authority over the family. That is not their right. It's a usurpation based on, and they use that you can do that based on just mere allegations. These are monsters. These are evil people abusing power, destroying families. They're tyrants.
And didn't you get rewarded with a government paid vacation for
Oh yeah, I got my
about
2
a week?
weeks. Yeah, I got my 2
2
weeks.
weeks.
Reached 30 people. Oh yeah, it was great.
Hey, there wasn't the Apostle Paul in jail quite a bit too?
Yeah. A lot of the reformers are in jail too. I know you're but historically, a lot of people that stood for the truth are put in jail. And sometimes what's interesting is merely asserting the same rights that our founders did in this country can land a father in jail. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, it
And a pastor.
Well, there's another thing I think that's interesting here is that what he's describing is they set up their own judicial system within the judicial system, and then they used it to experiment. They used it to learn how to set these things up, and then you can go and expand it elsewhere. What's one of the things we learned? Why don't you think of the children? And that short circuits people's brains and says, "Oh, the children. We've got to save the children." Because that's a core.
You're not saving the children. You're making
Right.
things worse.
I got to make this point right here. Yes, it's been used against men. Now you removed men, and he already said it's also used against women and parents. Just look, they got this law in California that for promoting gender affirming care, if your kid is in school and wants to change gender, now they will facilitate that and not tell the parents. That includes the mother.
Mm-hmm.
So when you don't fight for father's rights, you will lose your rights. And we're in the process of seeing that. You can't put a corral on this and just keep the injustice against men without it bleeding over to the women.
Oh, Steve, had a thought. This is probably part of why it's so important to push the idea on women that it is important to be single, sexually promiscuous party animals. Because those are women who don't care about their kids. They want to hand them over to the state. They want the state to take care of them because they need to be out partying. They need to be out fucking. I see it's 40 minutes in, so I'm going to say that. And so in order to drive more people into the welfare system, we have to now convince women that it's good to give up their children.
Yeah, well, that belief does support the welfare state.
Okay.
It suits the welfare state.
Right. And so they don't talk about it. We don't want to talk about female promiscuity. Oh no, we can't talk about that.
I will.
Yeah, I think all of us will here. but yeah, we're not allowed to talk about that.
We'll talk about male promiscuity too.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Marshalling the courts as a political weapon to eliminate political opponents is a major modus operandi of the Biden junta. Political prosecutions to eliminate Donald Trump from the election and punish his supporters like Steve Bannon and the citizens who were at the Capitol on January 6th are widely and rightly condemned. Yet similar lawfare operations have long been standard operating procedure against ordinary Americans. The cutting edge and the most serious example of lawfare is the family courts. Family courts may not be the first or only practitioners of lawfare, but they are where the technique was systematized and refined. For years, lawfare has been used by feminists and family court judges to eliminate unwanted fathers. They did this so successfully for so long that it is hardly surprising that other courts are now borrowing the same methods to eliminate unwanted political opponents and unwanted citizens. Number 5, sexual accusations. Sexual accusations pioneered in the family courts likewise provide one of the main weapons. Trumped-up accusations of child abuse and domestic violence used in family court.
Stop. He's going to use that R word.
I gotta skip this, huh?
Well, just skip ahead about 30 seconds.
Okay. Yeah,
I mean, he's got the laundry list. We know what it is.
Yeah, we know what it is. That's true.
Culminated in the current lawfare against Trump and his officials and supporters. Number 6, abusing and politicizing children. Politicizing and sexualizing children, and even physically mutilating them, has become a central part of the mainstream leftist agenda, supported by the Biden administration. Parents have experienced widespread erosion and violation of their parental rights, and those who try to protect their children are designated as domestic terrorists and targeted for criminal punishments. This too has engendered widespread condemnation. But this too is not new. The politicization of children was pioneered by the welfare system and the family courts. As any parent knows who has experienced these institutions, social workers and family court judges see parents as their rivals and enemies, starting with fathers, and they never hesitate to curtail their rights without any due process of law or any finding that the parents have done anything legally wrong. Often they don't even pretend that the parents have committed any legal transgression before permanently separating them from their children and even imposing other penalties on the parents.
These
Number
people.
7.
Okay, let me say this. You hope these people in power doing this, if ever the tides change against them, I will not be there to protect them. I will encourage whatever happens to them. I will have no remorse.
Well, we have to be careful with the encourage word because that can get you in trouble legally. But if you just say, yeah, if that happens to you, I'm just going to stand by and do nothing. Okay.
We touched on this theme in a past program. The color of law enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
where we talked about how the police enforce this kind of oppression on fathers. Good, decent men. And if push comes to shove, if they need support, and who cares about women's support? If things get really bad, they're going to need the support of average men. And how many average men have suffered some kind of injustice at the hands of police? Again, we're not inclined to come to your rescue after you treated us this way.
Well, this goes back to what I was saying. earlier about unintended consequences. They're trying to act like the police are still 1950s Andy Griffith people that you should just
No.
want to jump and, hey, that's a good person. I would want to save them. It's like, okay, but you have turned the police into a weapon against men, and then you're shocked when the men are just watching the police, struggle, going, yeah, I don't care. Like, this is why these things, these social projects always come to an end, because not only are the people pushing them unwilling to look at the unintended consequences, even if they did, they would tell you that it doesn't matter because they're right. And so either they'll say, well, because I'm right and good, that the unintended consequences can't happen, or that they shouldn't happen because it's right and good. And so therefore the goodness of people will come out and prevent these consequences from happening. And that's what we're not seeing happen. And so the system, the biological system, is now correcting itself.
So I'm going to say this. Remember all those people saying, I was just following orders. I was just doing my job.
Mm-hmm.
No, under your watch, you sick fucks, their genitals were mutilated, pumped full of crap. No, you're going to get what's coming to you in a public trial, and the results I encourage of that trial. You will get what's coming to you.
Okay, Shutai says kicking fathers out is destroying most children. Yeah, he's talking about that and a whole bunch more. And you know what? Whether these people receive justice in this life really doesn't matter. They will be judged by their actions. And I hope they repent.
Well, it's part of the problem of losing the moral and religious nature of the nation. It is a lot easier to act this way if you don't believe that there's not going to be any future consequence that you're in no control over, because the propagandists can come in and say, don't worry, we will protect you from the temporal consequences. Now, whether or not they actually can is a very different question, but that's what they're offered. That's what the people doing the stuff are offered. They say, don't worry, you are a special class. And that's, by the way, why in all dictatorships, the police are a special class. The police get the first and best food. They get the first and best clothes. They get the first and best vehicles. They get the first and best houses. Okay. So the powers that be know that they can control the temporal actions of the enforcement class, if you will.
But they're also quick. All the revolutionaries, supporters that brought them into power.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, those are the first people to be purged and thrown in the place.
Throughout history. It's why I'm always just flabbergasted at the revolutionary mindsets. It's like, oh, well, I need to be at the tip of this revolution, and we're going to change the world. And I'm like, no, you're going to be the first up against the wall because when, and Stalin was famous for this.
That's where I thought you were good.
Right.
I was tracking. Yep.
Yeah. When Stalin's purges came about, because he intuitively recognized that the revolutionary was the most likely person to start a revolution against him. I mean,
yeah, well, there was a inner group that was vying for power,
mm-hmm.
and he won. Well, Lenin won first, but okay, Lenin first. But then Trotsky was right there. What
Oh,
happened
yeah.
to Trotsky?
He got killed by an
Okay.
ice axe in Argentina.
I thought it was Mexico.
Yeah, okay.
One or the
Somewhere.
other.
Yeah.
But the point is, okay, if you're part of this movement that's trying to accomplish this great thing, you know what? You're actually more dangerous than the run-of-the-mill person. So I don't think you want to be there, but you do you.
Forever wars. The Biden administration now seems determined to embroil the United States in as many overseas wars as possible: Ukraine, the Middle East, China, and Taiwan. Moreover, their warmongering is actively supported by the neoconservatives of the Republican Party. These wars are justified not for the security or other vital interests of the United States. Instead, they are rationalized to spread what is described as liberal democracy, but what is more accurately described as liberal left ideology. The cutting edge of this radicalization of US foreign policy is sexual ideology, especially radical feminism. This is the same feminism that created and controls the welfare agencies and family courts. One of the first institutions to become radicalized and feminized was the military, and today it is one of the most feminized institutions in America. The American military long ago became a massive welfare state. That's right. Its generous benefits, intended for the families of servicemen, act as a magnet for single mothers, whom it also provides with salaries, not as real soldiers, but as clerks and especially as lawyers. The result is that the military no longer values or honors men who sacrifice life and limb for their country. On the contrary, men who serve their country overseas return home often to find that they have been divorced unilaterally and involuntarily in their absence. Their children have been confiscated from their care and custody, and they even face criminal charges for child support arrearages allegedly accrued while they were serving in uniform. What could more effectively undermine the morale that is vital for military strength, or could contribute to the recruitment crisis that the military is now experiencing?
So this actually gets back to the point I was making earlier. You have to give comfort to the enforcement class. And what he's saying here is they're not even doing that anymore. If you want to know how far gone down this rabbit hole we are, they are now using the enforcement class as a welfare program, which is wild when you think about it. I mean, it's true, and it has been true for a long time. There's I forget the term for it, and the Navy guys in the chat, they'll tell me. But one of the popular things for women to do was you go into the Navy, you get stationed on a boat, and then you intentionally get knocked up because you can get a nice cushy desk job, and the Navy can never send you out on a boat ever again. And so you get that. He's talked about the desk jobs and the lawyers and all of that. Uh-huh. The Navy, and the women go into the Navy knowing that this is what they're going to do. The Army's a little different because they don't have boats that you can go out and basically have a bunch of trapped horny men on, right? But the same game plays out there in the Army. Different mechanics, same game. So, yeah. And this has been going on for, let's see, there were some big scandals under Bill Clinton in the 90s. So we're talking about 30 years ago now.
This feminization has had an impact on military effectiveness itself. Most obviously, it literally weakens the military to pretend that women can serve in combat units. But it does not stop there. As long ago as the Vietnam War, military operations themselves were being justified as a form of international social work, an international welfare state. The Johnson administration was implementing the same Great Society welfare policies in cities like Saigon with the same disastrous results that they had already rehearsed in American cities.
Oh, you mean like what happened to a certain demographic in the United States who had actually better family situations than the whites before his Great Society came out and put women under, gave them child support?
They're not supposed to talk about that. Nick,
I didn't mention anything. I didn't mention anybody.
I believe the acronyms you're looking, the three letters you're looking for are C, R, and A. but yeah, we don't say those words on YouTube.
Hence the vagueness.
Yes.
were justified for women's rights and supported even by supposedly pacifist women's groups like Code Pink. American foreign policy was strongly sexualized during the Obama administration, when women's rights and homosexuals' rights were explicitly designated as goals of U.S. foreign policy. Intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations and NATO, and these are strongly dominated by the United States, have also become bastions of radical feminism and expend far more time and resources to promote gender equality than they do to ensure collective security and preserve global peace for which they were supposedly created. Now, I have emphasized all through this the American context, because that is the epicenter of all this, and that is the subject of my book. But European governments have slavishly followed the Americans, both in imitating their example domestically and in supporting their reckless adventures abroad. Traditionally, the Europeans, and especially the British, served as loyal but critical advisors to the Americans and moderated unwise actions which they sometimes undertook. But now European governments resemble the old puppet governments of Eastern Europe, toadying to the Americans, as some of them used to toady to the Soviet Union. Why is this? Simple. Here, too, the culprit is the welfare state. If you want to have an independent foreign policy, you must have a strong and independent military. Without a viable military, you cannot have your own foreign policy, and therefore your own sovereign state. European conservatives complain that their national sovereignties are undermined by the European Union through immigration. But their sovereignty is undermined just as much by NATO, which controls their foreign policy. The Europeans depend for their defense on the Americans. So when it comes to international affairs, the Americans call the shots. And why can't European countries maintain their own independent militaries? Because they prefer to spend the money on their comfy welfare states. This is more than an economic trade.
I'm going to stop it here because I don't know where he's going with this, but I think he might be missing something here. We were talking about birth rates on Monday. Okay. And I didn't pull up a chart for it because I didn't have it handy, but there's a chart for the birth rate and the demographics of Germany. And these social welfare, he's absolutely right about what's gone on in Germany, or in Europe. Every country except France has literally forgotten how to have kids. Germany and Italy are just the worst. Even Poland, who's kind of held up as the sort of European Texas of, they actually just reading the news today, they got their first F-35 delivered today. I mean, they're arming up for war, and even they have pretty gnarly birth rates. So yes, he's absolutely right. The first place that Germany slashed or put the money it took out of the Bundeswehr, their army, was into their social welfare state. And they did that in the 90s. Specifically, within a few years of the fall of the wall. It's like by 95, 96. And they could get away with it because the demographic structure was you had a bunch of 30 and 40-year-olds who were highly knowledgeable, who had been, they'd been engineering for war. They'd been preparing for war with the Soviet Union. And all of a sudden, they didn't have to do that anymore. So they went and did things like BMW, the car manufacturing. They built, these very over-engineered cars that everyone loves. Okay. And they turned Germany into a manufacturing powerhouse. But because they weren't having kids of their own, they had to export that. And that meant primarily to the United States and China. Well, okay. Roll that forward 30, 40 years, yeah, roughly. And now your 30 and 40-year-olds are 60, 70. They're aging out of the economy, in some cases straight into coffins. And Germany can no longer maintain its export-led abundance of capital that it was using to fund what I would describe as a cradle-to-grave welfare state. So, again, speaking about unintended consequences, these welfare states invariably lead to crashing birth rates, and the crashing birth rate leads to 30, 40 years later, a crashing economy. If the US follows along the trajectory that it's on right now of falling birth rates, we will have 30 to 40 years of pretty high level prosperity. We'll have a lot of people who are capable of building a lot of things. They'll do a lot of cool things, like if you want to electrify the nation and do all of the EV stuff, now is the time to do it. I'm not speaking about whether or not I agree with it. I'm just saying that from a capital standpoint, now is the time. But
Well, you still have a lot of smart people around. You still
Right.
have a good number of smart engineers and technicians and workers, and they're available in sufficient quantity to do this. But roll the clock ahead 20 years with just birth rate demographics alone. But I guess you can pile on our education system. Not looking like we're going to be able to replace our current workforce with people of equal caliber.
absolutely not. And that's when you really start to pay the price. So, I want to make it clear that we are not in favor of falling birth rates, even if it does provide a momentary improvement to the economy. And because it would be momentary. Anyway.
Trade-off, and it reflects two sharply opposed understandings of government itself. A country with an army is a patriarchy, with strong men and women who respect them. A country with a welfare state is a matriarchy, with domineering women and weak men whom the women despise. The choice is ours. The point of all these examples is to show that the injustices and destruction wrought by the welfare divorce machinery cannot be confined, and it has not been confined, to parents and families. They were the rehearsals for larger, even more destructive policies that have now been unleashed against other Americans and also citizens of other countries. And these are only the most concrete and tangible examples. I could point out, for example, as I have in some articles in Chronicles magazine, that the riots incited by BLM and Antifa in the summer of 2020 were instigated largely by adolescents made fatherless by the family courts and the welfare system. I could point out that BLM, Black Lives Matter, is an organization founded and run not by Black men, but by Black feminists, and their manifesto proclaims their intent to further destroy Black men and Black families. In other words, I think that the racial tension in this country is largely a front, a flanking maneuver for a sexual agenda, which is really what's important. I could point out, as Janice Fiamengo has done, that the same feminists were the most vociferous and aggressive in pushing for the COVID lockdowns that wrought such destruction in people's livelihoods and in the economy of the entire society. So, what can be done about all this? Well, the other striking thing about the best of today's commentators on our crisis is that they have no solution. They issue frustrated calls for Americans to wake up and oppose all this, which seldom works. They call on Europeans to resist their governments, but this too is unlikely. It's an ironic choice of words to call on Americans to wake up, considering that they identify the woke ideology as the source of the problem. Anyway, I think too many commentators place far too much faith in elections, hoping for a savior to ride in on a white horse following an election victory. I agree, in fact, that the coming US election is certainly the most important in my lifetime. And the first one in my lifetime was in 1960. If Biden or someone like him wins, the result will accelerate the decline of the US and the West. But if Trump wins, we will not be out of the woods by any means. So either way, more is needed. The only way out of this debacle is to break the power of radical ideology. This means we must break the power of radical feminism, which now stands undisputed at the forefront of the left and serves as its cutting edge. Okay. You might say this is easier said than done,
Stop
but not
right
necessarily.
there. Is there any? Do you think is a big surprise why all these NGOs and investigations into and tar and feathering campaigns by governments and etc. are against the red pill?
No, we're one of the few, if not the only, groups out here trying to build the kind of men that would, well, they'd be what's the word, problematic for the people in power.
Well,
Exactly.
we're the only people identifying the problem. And in order to solve the problem, you first have to identify the problem.
Yep.
And there are things that we want to implement because we're here and we've seen it and thought through it. And the average person is just oblivious to the whole thing. So no solutions will come from them. That makes us dangerous if they don't want change. Or change. If they don't want traditional change, let's put it that way.
Well,
And let's put it this way: they're the radicals.
Right.
yeah, I mean, in the most traditional sense of the word conservative, what we're advocating for is really kind of a return to what has been demonstrated to work in the past. I don't see how you can call that radical. It's like,
We want a resurgence of sanity, guys. Not radicalism. We're
yeah,
against.
I think we've had enough radicalism for a century or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have not really tried. For this, I turn to the greatest mind the men's movement has ever produced, Professor Daniel Amneas. Amneas was a brilliant Shakespeare scholar who also wrote powerful books on fatherhood. His greatest book was titled The Case for Father Custody. There, Professor Amneas outlined this key principle. The linchpin in the feminist program is mother custody following divorce. I'm quoting here. The linchpin in the feminist program is mother custody following divorce. Pull that pin and the feminist structure collapses. End quote. And I might add the rest of the radical sexual agenda collapses with it. I think the left today collapses with it. More than anything, it is mother custody of children that undermines masculinity and turns men into frightened, impotent sissies, at the same time that it turns their children into aggressive nihilists, rebelling against their fathers and everything else. Amneas continues, quote, until then, men must remain afraid of women, of marriage, and of feminism, end quote. He adds that they must also fear the divorce court judges, and I will add that they, and all of us, must fear all government officials who learned from the matriarchy how to create and enforce other bureaucratic tyrannies of the deep state, and who understand that ordinary men heading families poses the principal impediment to their power. In today's terms, the only possible solution is clear. We must once again make marriage a legally enforceable contract by abolishing the indefensible oxymoron of no-fault justice, and we must restore a presumption of father custody. Is this impossible? No, not at all. It is very feasible. It is feasible because men have an enormous source of leverage that is growing every day, but that they have never used. This leverage comes from the marriage strike, also known as men going their own way, or MGTOW. Helen Smith described this 10 years ago in her important book, Men on Strike, and since then it has only intensified. This is men refusing to marry and start families because they know how divorce courts can destroy every aspect of their lives. Now, by itself, the marriage strike cannot accomplish anything, and so far it has not even tried to accomplish anything. This is because it has no direction or purpose. The men's revolt is a genuinely spontaneous citizen action.
I would argue that it's not so much spontaneous, more just the net result, the unintended consequences of the actions taken. This was always going to end this way for the radical left, the radical feminist agenda. It can't end any other way.
And we're not MGTOWs here. None of us are men going their own way.
Say,
But
all three of us have been or are married.
right.
Right.
But
But
go ahead.
I was going to say there's a logical consequence, and people react to results certain ways, and I can understand why they're doing. I don't agree, but I can understand their men's reaction.
Well, I think the point that we have to sort of accept, and particularly that the Christians need to wrestle with, is he's right. The men, the only leverage the men have right now is to not get involved with these institutions at all. And this is why I get so frustrated with guys like Jeremy Boring saying, oh, well, just get married. We'll fix this in some unspecified future. Just get married now, but it's going to be so much work for us to fix it that we can't fix it right away. No. The strike ends after you fix it. And I mean, I have other data and charts and stuff, and we can get into this because we were talking about birth rates, and everyone wants to say everyone, and here I'm actually going to point some fingers back at people who are closely aligned with us. You aren't going to fix this by nagging and cajoling and sort of mommying men into getting married again. And I'm saying getting married as a precursor requirement to having kids. It isn't anymore, but having kids out of wedlock doesn't help anybody either. And it actually feeds the system. Right now, the only way that I can see forward, and I think this is what Professor Baskerville is saying as well, is in order to fix the problem, we have to starve the system of the people that it feeds on.
Don't feed the beast.
It's Steve, you've watched more of the video. You can tell me if I'm on the right track or not, but
Yeah, more or less. He's not anti-marriage, but he's saying it needs to change. So it's not a long-term solution, but it's a short-term necessity. We have to use this leverage.
right. And what I think what I'm getting at is the system will not change until the pain of these consequences gets too great for the system to bear. And the radicals, and I think we need to understand just how radical these people are and just how willing they are to die for their own ideology. And I don't necessarily mean that entirely literally, although literally, yes, too. These people will happily die. They would much rather order you to go die for them, of course.
They'll happily sacrifice others
Right.
to promote their agenda.
They'll do that with a smile on their face. But you have to understand that these people will die for this stuff, even themselves. And that's the level of pain that's going to be necessary. You're going to have to inflict a similar level of pain on the system. The men are going to have to stand up and say, yeah, we're just not getting married anymore. And the data says that they aren't. And they're going to have to say, yeah, we're not going to feed our kids into the court system anymore. And the only way that men have to not feed kids into the court system, because once you have a kid, the woman controls everything, guys, like it or not.
Yep.
Nick will tell you all about it. I'm sure he could do a whole stream on this. Okay. The only leverage that men have is no marriage, no kids. That's it. And until we get to the point, and I'm not saying this is good. I'm not saying that this is even, like biblically, I get that we're called to go forth and multiply. But if multiplying feeds the devil, feeds Satan, is that helping?
Well, there is another thing that might work. The church leadership has to get on this issue. And then what they need to do is say, okay, we are in control of marriage. You want to get married? For instance, you want to get married in the Catholic Church? No. Yeah, we are against prenups. But there's been so little understanding of marriage, you're going to sign a marriage contract, a legally binding marriage contract that outlines what the duties are in marriage and who the children belong to. And they start advocating that strongly and saying, and if you do not abide by this contract, here's the consequences. and we're going to live by this on a day-to-day basis as a culture. Each church could do that. And so now you're providing an alternative, a solution. Will it work? I don't know. Is it likely to happen? No.
Well, according to the natural law of the 10th commandment, the children belong to the father.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So why should the churches really have a problem doing that? Unless the church is a feminist institution.
Oh,
Just like the military.
have we talked about this before, guys?
I think we have. Yeah, it seems to be a recurring theme that we have.
Well, and I would point back to the Seneca Falls Convention on Women's Rights as, I mean, we call it the birthplace of modern feminism, but again, I point to the fact that the two largest delegations to that were Baptists and what you would call Methodists today.
Quakers, yeah, and Quakers.
Yeah, the Quakers. Yeah.
Well, Quakers are pretty big too, but Methodists have a strong affiliation and affection to feminism.
Right.
Historically.
And until the church acknowledges that the church has significant culpability and complicity with creating this problem, and do not hide behind the fact that, well, I'm not in a Protestant church, I'm Orthodox or I'm Catholic. No. I live near an Orthodox church where they openly celebrate gay people. Your church is not better. Your individual church may be, but your church organization is not better. Go ahead.
What this could be a strangely unifying moment for the church, universal church. But yeah, at least you're actually kind of seeing that on if you look at my Twitter page, we kind of have a movement of men cross-denominational that are affirming the patriarchy and kind of not fighting each other, but saying, no, we actually need to have a unified front on this issue. Hey, church leaders, maybe you should take note of that. Especially the younger generation, they want nothing to do with you effeminate cucks that are ruining their family. And these same guys that they hear, oh, you just need to marry and man up. No, they're being really careful.
Well, Nick, it's what we said in a prior video. The descriptions are the problem. Not because the descriptions are the problem themselves, but because the descriptions point to the source of the problem. Women.
The solution is men. And in the Revolutionary War, it's like 5% of the population accomplished it. So if the red pill, or the Christian red pill, or the manosphere, or the MGTOW, if they band together like Nick is talking about, and become 5% of the young male population in the church, can they have a dramatic impact? I think so. You don't even need a majority.
Steve's going to get us canceled for saying that men should band together.
No, just men should support men. How about that?
Okay.
It's a brotherhood.
Oh, there's a word I haven't heard in a long time. But yeah, the answer, men, is not to sit around and play video games all day and pretend that, oh, woe is me, women don't care about me, so I'm just going to disappear down the video game hole. I mean, yeah, it kind of supports this, but getting out and getting active, not with women, definitely not with political groups. Oh my goodness, don't do that. But getting active, let's say you go to a church. Let's say you are already a Christian. Start with your leadership. Start demanding action. And I don't mean, you know, well, you've got to say this and that, and you've got to, no. You go to your pastor and you say, look, if we do not start dealing with female promiscuity in this church, we will lose this church. And I don't know, Nick can give you a lot of examples of things you could say, and maybe we need to do a stream on that. Maybe that's,
Could be a good episode.
yeah, it could be a good episode, but right now, I can guarantee you all your pastor hears about and hears from are the women who whine about the fact that he mentioned occasionally in one sermon that women occasionally sin and they probably shouldn't do that. And, maybe abortion isn't such a great idea. There's another thing I want to say too, and that is, Nick, you've said this. I don't know if you said it publicly, but you've said it privately. No enemies to the right of me.
Right. Stop fighting amongst.
Yes.
Yeah, you can criticize one another, but don't create enemies for people that you need right now.
Well, what I would say is our enemy knows that we as Christians are obsessed with purity.
Yeah.
It knows that we're obsessed with being theologically correct.
And that's fine.
Sure.
It has its place.
But its place is not, it's not now. We don't have we're in a foxhole. We don't have the luxury of debating the finest points of theology. We just don't. If somebody is working towards the outcome that I'm working towards, personally, I don't question their theology. I don't ask which denomination they go to. I don't ask which branch of Christianity you're from, be it Catholic, Orthodox, Presbyterian, or whatever. If you're Protestant, if you're working towards the same goal, I will help you. Because no enemies to the right of me. We just cannot afford any longer to let ourselves be fractured.
And take note of those who always appease the left and punch right.
Oh God, yes. And it kills me when I see people on the right doing that. It just kills me. They're punching right. You're on the right. You're in the right too. You're in the ideological correct, and then you have to go and say things like, "Oh God, Tim Pool, men just need to man up," or or what was the one he did? It was the world is falling apart, and I blame men. I think Professor Baskerville here has clearly elucidated that while men may share complicity by not understanding and not reacting to this, men are not driving the destruction of our society. It is women. The solution is going to be men handling women.
I'll give an illustration. Right now, let's talk about the Siege of Vienna. We have the winged hussars in our background, so it kind of makes sense to talk about that. Look, the enemy has invaded Christendom. They seek to do a lot of bad things to you, enslave you, pillage, other GRAP stuff to men, women, and children. Do you think they care if you're Protestant, Orthodox, or Catholic? No. and neither at that point should you. They're coming to ruin your very lives and civilization. All your theological strong points, great. It has a place. But if you do not band together, you're going to perish. And the enemy knows that. And they want to subvert. And they want to divide because it makes it easier for them.
Nick, does this mean you're going to stop calling me a damn papist?
Hell no. But I don't call you my enemy either.
I mean, and honestly, guys, what you just saw there is actually how you can build bridges with other people. You have Nick, who is an OPC hardcore Presbyterian Protestant, and right above him is one of those damn papists. And we can all joke about that. If men can take their disagreements and turn them into jokes, turn them into memes, they lose all power over you. They become a point where they become an inside joke that everyone can laugh at who gets the joke, and the enemy is sitting there befuddled. Why isn't it working anymore?
Yeah.
You think this gives you power over me? A good meme there. Yeah.
Right. So, Steve, do you want to keep going, or are we?
I think we should go a little further. We probably won't get to the end, though.
Okay.
In fact, that in itself is its strength. Men do it on their own without any prompting or encouragement. But like any strike, it must be directed to a purpose. It must be used as leverage to accomplish a concrete goal. That goal is to reform the unjust, utterly indefensible, no-fault divorce laws and the crooked courts that administer them. The proof that this will work comes from the fury that is already unleashed from the political class. I describe all this in my book. In the last few years, politician after politician, pundit after pundit has queued up to scold and excoriate young men for their failure to marry and start families. They have become almost apoplectic with rage and invective. Ironically, this comes primarily not from the feminists, but especially from the conservative political class, and above all from evangelical pastors and other political activists. Ironically, these are the same people who have failed spectacularly to save the family that they claim to value from accelerated decline and destruction. These scolding tongues accuse men of puerility for refusing to put their head in the noose of feminist divorce law. But they can scold and bluster all they want. It is their own fault for ignoring these abuses year after year, and there is nothing else they can do about it. No clearer proof exists of a professional political class that hates and fears its own citizens than the vitriol it pours out against men who initiate their own measures to defend their own freedom. The conservative members of that class would rather go down to defeat than allow ordinary citizens to displace them from their exalted place as gatekeepers of opposition and political bosses over the rest of us. It is easy to see why the political class, especially the conservative political class, hates young men. Men acting on their own can succeed where the professional political class has failed. The implications are potentially sweeping and revolutionary and go far beyond men's issues.
We're moving a little fast, but what he said something, and we touched on it earlier, but I want to point it out, especially the conservative political class. It is the conservatives, not the liberals, who are the most threatened by the red pill and everything it stands for.
Could it be that they really don't like the descriptors?
Yes, because the conservatives, I for some reason that I do not understand, and I would have to go do research, pedestalize women to a degree that puts the leftists to shame. And so when we come in and we say, yeah, women are like this, women are promiscuous as fuck, they go,
Yeah.
oh, how dare you? They outbred a
The men that are causing them to do that.
Exactly.
No,
you open your own legs.
There's always going to be 10, 20% of men who are there and ready, and probably a larger percentage of young men.
Yep.
So you cannot control 100% of men so the women will behave. Won't happen.
And the
We have to-
Islamists try this too, going the other way. They think they can control women 100%, and then so that men will behave, which I think is actually why the left is so enamored of Islam. But neither strategy works. Islam is just as wrong as the conservative Christians.
So we need to keep going a little bit further because he's going to make another major point
Excellent.
that we can comment on.
Striking male citizens are effectively declaring that the political class, not just the Republican Party, the obvious rhino Republicans or neoconservatives, but the entire entourage of professional hangers-on, right as well as left, is unnecessary, redundant, and even parasitic. By boycotting marriage and families, men acquire the leverage to demand critical political and legal changes and restore democratic government without relying on politicians, judges, lawyers, lobbyists, lapdog journalists, parlor intellectuals, and the others who have usurped our citizenship and who mostly serve to stand in the way. Rather than mortgaging their citizenship to paid professionals, men can once again seize the initiative and become active citizens and the true leaders of society. And all the political class can do is fuss and fume and call them ugly names. This is why the men's strike has the potential to achieve far more than justice for fathers and children in the courts, even more than restoring marriage and families, though it will also do that. If properly directed, it will curtail the power of the deep state, the judicial oligarchy, and the entire political class that pretends to oppose the deep state and judicial oligarchy, but really is just an extension of them. Now, as long as the marriage strike is purely a matter of fear and self-preservation, so long as its purpose, so long as it lacks purpose, so long as it lasts indefinitely and open-endedly, without demanding concrete changes in government policy, then there is some truth in what the scolds say. Men should not forego, they should not have to forego marriage and children and families. These are life's greatest joys, and the vast majority of men want to enjoy these blessings. Men should also not cower in fear of women and judges. In itself, it is indeed an unmanly stance. I do not advocate the marriage strike as a permanent life choice. Like any effective strike, it is a temporary measure, a means to an end. But young men have nothing to lose, because it takes what many young men are already doing spontaneously, and what inevitably they will continue to do, whether we like it or not, no matter how much we scold them, and it channels their boycott into constructive goals that serve the larger public good.
Did you guys hear what he said there about the scold?
Yeah.
It takes what they were already doing and what the scolds already don't like and channels them. And to my mind, this is what the red pill, the manosphere, whatever you want to call it, this is what we're about. This is the mission more than anything else, is to make it so that the scolds can shut up and go away.
As I say, fuck off.
Right. So we have to keep going because he's going to bring up women pretty soon.
All right.
And that's a great point.
This makes it not puerile, but manly. The other beauty of this is that it requires none of the things that we do not have. It requires no money, no new organizations begging for money, no paid professional leaders eager for the first opportunity to join the political class and betray the rest of us. It requires only a few politically articulate people like those at this conference, to publicize what the men are doing and issue the necessary demands. They do not even have to agree with one another 100% on precisely what those demands are, but they will need the bulk of young men to provide the leverage by their actions that will force the political class to listen. And by the way, I might add here that among the politically articulate people that we might invite to help give purpose to this strike, this boycott, are the religious clergy. Historically, that's an important role they serve. And I think they do have nothing to lose and everything to gain. But they must first forsake and repent of their shameful silence on this, and then serve as a voice for truly resuscitating the family, rather than their pointless gimmicks and worse that they use as the pretense for their silence and inaction. Now, some people ask me, what about the women who must suffer from not having men to marry? The women are already complaining that they do not have men to marry. Okay, if they want husbands and families, they must join with the men, support the men, and demand reform as well. Nothing will bring faster results than angry women pointing the finger, not at the men, but at the corrupt divorce industry. The women, too, have nothing to lose and everything to gain. The sooner it is successful, the sooner more men and women and children and societies can go back to having happy, healthy families without the threat and extortion of divorce hanging over their lives. I hope the importance of what I'm saying sinks in. You, the young men of America and other countries have the potential to save not only yourselves, you are uniquely situated to save the entire civilization of the West. In fact, no one else can do it. You may feel helpless and impotent, but you are in a position to do what no one else can do. You and you alone can save our freedom and our civilization. And if you pass up this historical opportunity, you will deserve all the scorn and approbation that the feminists and scolds heap on you. And that is how history will judge you. Finally,
Okay.
you must rely on no one
Well, he said finally. Maybe we should listen to his.
Yeah.
but yourselves. You cannot expect to be rescued from the railroad tracks by politicians, however well-spoken, by influencers, however mediagenic, or by women, however well-intentioned. You alone must rescue first yourselves and then everyone else. Your own willingness to act is itself a major part of your freedom. Salvation will not come from elections. It will not come from watching videos and clicking like and leaving endless comments with endless opinions about the unfairness of it all. It will come from action by you. So stop dreaming and act. But there is no reason not to act. You have nothing to lose. You can refrain from marriage and women and waste away in obscurity, or you can refuse to marry with defiance and show the world that you act in principle. The choice is yours.
Okay.
In closing,
I think he pretty much outlined what needs to happen, but what will inevitably happen. Because you're not going to change the minds of most of these young men
No.
into marriage. It's not going to happen. And the women are really, I mean, the number of women complaining that there's no good men to marry, and the number of women, divorced women, saying, there's no one who wants to marry me now.
Good.
It's that message is just increasing in more and more people, and you can't put a lid on this. You can't undo it. This movement, that's not really a movement. That's not the word I'm looking for. Development tendency is just going to keep running its course.
Consequences.
We're on a track where marriage rates are declining and the birth rate is declining. Nothing, no amount of nagging or berating men into doing something about it will change anything. No amount of telling women they should act differently is going to do anything. They're just going to keep going this way until men, more and more men grumble about it, and more women whine and complain about it. And then the political class will take notice, and change is inevitable. Because also you got the economy in here, and the economy is going to continue on its trajectory, which long-term economic prospects are not good when men aren't married and have a reason to work hard because they're dropping out of the workforce or being underemployed. And, the economic prospects are not good. And then that forces the hand of the political class because you can't maintain your civilization.
All right. And to drive this point home, I do have another thing I want to share here because I'm the charts and graphs guy. This, I've heard people say, "Oh, Gen Z is more conservative. Gen Z is going to save us." Ahem. I present to you Exhibit A in my rebuttal. This is an August 2024 poll from Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. These are not states that are normally associated with highly left liberal feminist. I mean, we're talking Wisconsin. Wisconsin is Midwest. Wisconsin is, I mean, I know Madison and all that, but we don't normally associate Arizona and Georgia and Michigan. Well, maybe kind of Michigan, but
Michigan is a lot like Wisconsin. The whole northern or rural area is by and large pretty conservative.
right.
And the big cities are very, very left leaning.
But even places like Nevada, we don't normally associate with huge gobs of leftism. And this is a well-known Twitter account, and this is a screenshot of it. But yeah, the question is great. What the fuck is going on with Gen Z women? I mean, seriously. Plus 40 for a radical communist? Sure. That ends like, and that's what Baskerville was saying is, do not count on the women to save you. These are the women who are going to save us, then I don't want to be saved.
Let me ask you something else. Okay. Now, I know this is all races, but let's assume black women are even more inclined to vote for Kamala Harris. What about black men?
So we
Have
actually
you talked to black men? No,
Yes.
isn't there a lot of resentment from
Yes.
black men towards bossy black women? It's like nails on a chalkboard to them. They don't like it.
Well, we actually do have data on this, and black women are going for Harris at a lesser rate than they've gone for any other Democrat in like 40 years. Black men have basically, according to the data, want almost nothing to do with this. Most of this stuff actually comes out of the white side of the spectrum, shall we say. I hate to say it, but that is what it is. Again, I don't have because I didn't realize we were going down this particular track this evening. I don't have that poll data up, but the other thing I would point out is, look at that 45 to 64 bucket. Those are your Gen Xers. I want to point out that the Gen Xers are the smallest voting generation right now. Gen Z will be smaller when it's fully filled out, but they're not fully filled out yet. So there's and everyone gets Gen Z wrong. They want to make it a 7-year bucket. Sorry, it's going to be closer to 24. The last Gen Zers haven't been born yet, so all you Gen Alpha people can pound rocks as far as I'm concerned. And the millennials are not where the problem is. When you're talking about voting demographics, you need to go have a conversation with Gen Z, because Gen Z is what's going to tip this for Harris.
And look at those boomers.
Yeah, they're not helping it either.
Man, they're delusional. Hey,
Well,
the boomers are kind of the people who got you into
yep.
well, I'm a boomer, so yeah, we got you into this mess. Sorry, but we're not the solution here.
Nope. And more to the point, the boomers have the luxury of being ideological because they can. I don't have my charts up because, sorry guys, I had to rebuild my computer and reinstall my operating system last night. Drive died. So I don't have all my charts up. But if you remember from the last episode, we put that chart up of who owns what, and half of it's owned by boomers. They have the wealth to afford the luxury of voting for this bullshit. And so that's why
And the rest of you younger folk, just don't worry about it. because we're just happy being boomers and spending your inheritance.
Oh yeah. And they are. And they're spending it on there's a reason that Vegas has exploded in the past 20 years, but particularly the past 10 years. And it's all boomers. I was there last year, almost a year ago now, to do a show with Donovan Sharp, and I hadn't been there since 2008, and I was floored. But I paid attention to who was pulling the handles on the slot machines. It wasn't people my age. It was people my parents' age. And I realize that's somewhat anecdotal, but yeah. Yeah, okay, shoo, yeah. Older millennials and Gen X will have to be the savior generation. Yeah, they will if they can figure their shit out. And frankly, a marriage strike, as Professor Baskerville was saying, yes, but more than likely, the marriage strike needs to come from the Gen Z men. And for that to happen, we would need to see a lot more Gen Z men. I mean, using this chart as a proxy, we need to see a lot more men supporting Trump than we do. So, now we talked about this beforehand, and I am going to pull it up on screen because it just so happened to pop up yesterday on the feeds, and it gets to what we were talking about, the scolds. I hate to do this because I love her work, but no. The reason that people are refusing to have kids has nothing to do with comfort. I'm sorry. We went over the math on this and on Monday, and I'm sure for some people this is true, but men still biologically want to be men. Okay? If you catch what I mean. You know, go ahead.
Let me say it this way. Men really don't have a problem with sacrifice. They're more than willing to sacrifice.
Yep.
They don't want to lose everything they've sacrificed for. Because
Correct.
they're putting their life blood and their sweat to supporting kids. And then, oof, they can be taken away in an instant.
I call it
In an
kidnapping.
instant. And then, along with half of my shit, and then you tax me through custody or child support. And now I can't be there for my kids, and you've impoverished me. So I'm going to have a miserable existence. But, okay, I can live with a miserable existence. But you destroyed everything I worked for and sacrificed for. And on top of that, now I can't even raise my kids upright. And you want me to sign up for this? I mean, a lot of men, I don't know if they can articulate that, but
I'm right there with you, Steve.
unconsciously,
I'm living.
they do believe that.
Well, and this I think is and I don't know, further down the comments, I suppose we could scroll down and well, here's a comment actually. This guy, you know, having one child is certainly not living life on easy mode. Raising even one child is probably the most difficult task anyone will ever undertake. I'm sure Nick would co-sign on that. It's really hard to tell people to continue to have kids when they're never, you know, likely to never going to see Social Security. He's talking about the economics of it. Look, women, us men we are very finely honed and tuned to the economic aspects of what's going on. It is not cope. It is a real problem. As I said, we went over the math on this. In order to have a kid, it's $120,000 a year on average in this country. Just accept it. Okay, that's $50,000 a year more than the average man makes. That means that the wife has to work too. Has to. That is a hard requirement. It's a mathematical requirement. And if the woman is working, guess what you're doing with the kids? You're shipping them off to the state. You're putting them in the feminist, in the welfare state. You are just, the problem with this post and this series of posts really is that she is actually asking men to continue to feed the feminist fires. And as you know, as I said, I love Rachel. Her book is awesome. Go get it. But this post right here is how you feed the machine. Because
Hey, let me push back on you a little bit, Plutarch.
Okay.
Okay. On the surface, I agree with your math.
Yes.
But I'm saying it is possible to have more kids on a lower salary. Here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to buy one of those little shitbox houses that were built post-World War II.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a 3-bedroom house. Okay. Kids are going to have to share a bedroom.
Yep.
And you know what? You're going to have to drive a 10 to 15-year-old car.
Yep.
Yeah. Sounds familiar to me.
And you might need 2 of those, or even possibly your wife. You have a 1-car family, and you make it work.
Yep.
And no, you don't go out to eat. No, you can't do a lot of stuff. And yeah, you're going to be scraping by every month. But here's the push. Your wife has to be on board with that. But you're willing to live just, kind of a subsistence level existence. There's going to be no fancy vacations. There's no extra money for anything.
And that's how
Then you can have more kids. But how many women are modern women are going to be satisfied with that?
Well, and that's really where I want to get to with this. This post, and it's not written towards women or men. This post needs to be directed at women. And as you kind of scroll down through the comments here, the women, they are.
I actually asked that question yesterday in response. Like, who are you talking to? Are you talking to men or women? She said both. So,
no, you don't need to talk to men. This isn't
You
for men.
You can't talk to both. Sorry, you can't. The message to women is different than the message to men.
Right.
Plenty of people are out there talking to men about what men should do.
As we did for much of this evening.
all right, I'll say something here. I have 7 kids. I did not make a lot of money at all. I lived in a 3-bedroom house. It was a church manse in a rural place in South Dakota. And we made it work. We did not have any luxuries. The nearest Walmart was like an hour and a half away. But do you think that helped solidify my marriage? I'm now divorced. Or do you think that pushed a woman with who's somewhat indoctrinated with the city life, the only child, being spoiled? Do you think that pushed her to want to be closer to her husband or resent him?
I'm guessing your wife was not happy with the amount of money you were bringing in. And she wanted a better lifestyle with to be able to buy more things and live better. Because as a pastor, there were parishioners, probably you had parishioners that were doing quite well.
Some,
who were driving
not.
newer
Most
cars.
Not. Most not. A lot
Well,
of them
this
were
is South
farmers.
Dakota.
A lot of them were farmers, ranchers.
Yeah, some farmers can be
Some, but
doing
not all.
quite well.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take all. Remember, women are not thinking statistically.
Right.
They're saying 1 or 2 or 3. Oh, look, they're living good. I want to live that way. And it's her nature to want more and want better. And just settling for that type of existence and remembering to take joy from having her children, that's kind of hard because children are a lot of work.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so I actually do agree with you guys. The point about what women want, though, I think is key here, because there's two ways you can have kids in the modern economy. The first is what you said, Nick, you and Steve. You pull way, way back. You pull, you say, okay, we're going to sacrifice to have these kids. We're going to live a 3-bedroom kind of dumpy place. We're going to drive a 15-year-old car. Yeah, it's going to suck when the repair bill comes in, because that repair bill is going to be, you can see $2,000, right?
Yep.
Okay. Most women don't want that. So what do men do to keep the woman they have who doesn't want that? The word starts with a D. Debt.
Yeah.
Endless piles of debt. They get cars on notes because the woman comes in and says, well, I've got these 3 kids. I need a bigger car. I need and I need a safer car. I need a newer car, right? You don't want to risk your kids' lives, do you? No, I need a for 3 kids. Oh, minivans aren't really popular. No. I need an Escalade. I need right. And, oh, hey, look, 3 bedrooms, that's not enough for the 4th kid that's on the way. We need to upgrade to a bigger house. Well, 4-bedroom houses are averaging in this country about $500,000 to $600,000 right now. So you're going to go get what we used to call a ninja loan. Okay. And it'll be some ridiculous teaser rate. And you're going to get blown apart if anything ever goes wrong in the economy and you can't get out of the loan. Okay. So there's a reason why we are one of the most indebted personally, individually, nations in the world. And it's because men are trying to do this.
And then, okay, the man says yes to all that and incurs that debt. Now he's got to make the payments.
Yep.
So that means overtime and or a second job.
Yep.
And now he's spending less time with his wife just to keep her happy with all her wants. But the more absent he is, the more dissatisfied she's going to get because he's never home. And then he comes home and he just flops on the couch and just sleeps. And he's never even helping me with the kids. I mean,
how many times have we heard that in divorce court? This is why we say the descriptions are the problem, because when you trace back the source of all of these problems, it's the women. And Shu, you are correct here. They are. We're just going to go with that. But
okay, yes, the problem is the women, but the men not ruling their woman, men not ruling women effectively.
Well, Steve, can they? Because she can just say, "Yeah, I'm going to go to."
It's difficult because she has that external enforcement arm out there.
Correct.
Right.
And we see this. Okay, we see this on a global scale. Now, regardless of which side you're on, Ukraine versus Russia, regardless of which side you're on, the Israelis versus the Palestinians, you have the U.S. government backing two of those. And without the U.S. government backing them, would they be able to do what they're doing? Would the war continue without that strong arm of justice supporting? Without that external force, wives might be more reasonable because you can't call law enforcement. The Ukrainians might reach a settlement. The Israelis might reach a settlement. Regardless of who you think is right and wrong, this strong arm police force backing up does not promote reaching accommodation.
Well, I think the point that I'm really trying to get here with this tweet is that you're not going to get the outcome you want. And I agree that it's a good outcome, but you're not going to get it until you fix the problem. And Baskerville made that point, I think, very clearly tonight. Just scolding and nagging the men to go out and marry those whores isn't going to work. If that was going to work, it would have worked in the 90s. It would have worked in the 2000s. It would have worked in the 2010s. I hate to say it, the 80s called, they want your strategy back. We need something else. We need something different. We need men to stand up and say, no, I am not having kids. I am not getting married until this changes.
You can try and come up with another solution. Scolding the men is not going to work. So that one's off the table. Other than the strike, what other thing is going to work? Oh, let's just convert them all to Jesus. Convert everybody to Jesus, and then everything will be wonderful. Yeah, well, okay, but let's talk about realistic things. And men, again, are not coming into the churches because the church is not patriarchal. And they do not think that the church has their back when it comes to
They don't.
supporting them.
That was a point that Baskerville made. The church should be front and center, and they're hiding in their behind their little pulpits, terrified of what the women in the pews are going to say. Fix that first.
Yeah, well, not everybody sees that this is obvious and inevitable. So things will continue on the track that they're currently on until more and more people realize that it is obvious and inevitable. So, therefore, when it becomes too painful not to change, then they'll change.
We have a ways to go on that, folks. There's still an episode I want to do about the fourth turning and how all that works. But here's the thing I would say. It would not take that many years of an orchestrated strike to knock the linchpin, as Baskerville was saying, out of the system. Probably takes more years than you guys want to admit. There's going to be a whole lot of men and women who are basically going to have to fall on their genetic swords and say, I will never be able to have kids because I'll be too old by the time this is resolved sufficiently to have kids. It's a shitty thing to have to tell the women who want kids that that's where this is going. But if we don't, the slow bleed can continue for up to 80 years. I want you all to hear that number. It takes 100 years, 80 to 100 years. It depends on the society to turn a demographic collapse around. There's actually a chart of like Peru or Paraguay, those demographic charts that show that they are starting to turn around a collapse that started, I think it was 100 years ago. Okay. So we could have a small generation of men and women who have no kids and they're not married, or we can literally destroy ourselves for the next 100 years. This is existential, and we have to get this right. And in order to get this right, we must have a Slavish religious devotion to the truth.
And guess what? The truth, facts don't care about your feelings, your shaming tactics, or any of that crap.
So for those who are saying, well, what we're promoting here is not Christian and therefore it's immoral. I'll tell you this. I will not encourage a young man to marry and give up his authority, his God-given authority, and his custody, his rights to his children. It's his. The children are his. Okay, how do we know this? Because when a man and woman get married traditionally, he takes his name. And then the children have his surname. He is Mr., which is a change from master. She is Mrs., which is mistress of, which means she belongs to him. The children belong to him. That is his authority. In Christianity, in the Bible from the very beginning. So encouraging a young man to get married and give up his authority is anti-Christian.
I do, and I said this before the show started. I do hate that it has come to this, that we have to, as Christians, go to men and say, if you do the thing that the Bible says is good, you will be feeding the devil. You will be feeding Satan. You'll be feeding his designs. But we have to acknowledge that sometimes that's how this works. So we can either man up, do the hard thing of telling the women, no, we are done. We are not playing this game anymore. We have a different game in mind, and you can either come along and join us on that game, or we can suffer a multi-generational population collapse.
No, I do recognize you can have a non-legally recognized covenant marriage.
Mhm.
But you have to still recognize you still have a prenuptial agreement. It's the way the courts handle and address things. You will, and James Sexton says that you're going to have a prenup. You will. It's either the one that society gives you, or it's the one of your own making.
Yep.
Right.
There is
Yep.
no option here. And even if you have a covenant, non-legally recognized marriage, you got the old prenup. So you need to have a marriage contract of duties and obligations and remedies for breach. And you need that exercised by a lawyer, and I don't know, talk to your lawyer, filed or whatever, but it has to be legally binding. Because if you don't have something legally binding that has a good, reasonable chance of superseding the status quo standard prenup treatment of the divorce and family courts, there is no guarantees there either.
Well, and I want to make a point here, that this is a little bit of legal maneuvering that people might not understand. There can be no contract that supersedes state law. So if the state says that all resources are divided 50-50, then you can't have a prenup that says, oh, well, you get this, you get that. It's 50-50. So even with this, you have to be very careful in how it is drafted. So for example, in my state, it's 50-50 of the marital assets. You can keep what you brought into the marriage. I brought most of the stuff into the marriage. I kept most of the stuff leaving, but we still had to go through and split 50-50 the stuff that we purchased together. So when Steve's talking about the societal prenup, understand that there are things that are not up for negotiation there. because the law just says, well, this is what you get. And this is going to vary in the United States. It'll vary by state. In Europe, it varies by country. But
And
understand, go ahead.
there's also, it's prudent when you buy a house, put the house in the man's name only. When you buy a car, put the car in the man's name only. Now, this is assuming you don't use two incomes to qualify for that.
Correct.
And yeah, okay, in the long term, it's still, if it's bought during the course of the marriage, it still might be a marital asset. But your name is there, which means if things get ugly, you can say, this house is in my name. Her name's not on it. You're not throwing me out of my house. You're not taking my car. And it has to wait to get resolved in court, which is going to be months, maybe a year, 18 months down the road.
Yep.
So, keep as much of that, do everything you can to maintain your authority.
With the understanding that there are limits on that. That's okay. We're not saying don't do these things. In fact, I would say go out and do them. But just understand that we do live in a society where things are legally stacked against men, and that because of that, there will be limits on what you can do.
Or just refuse to do anything.
Or just refuse to do anything.
But there's no simple answer here.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm going to say this, and this is going to piss off a lot of people, particularly in the church and on the right. The fastest way through this is a general marriage strike. Because you need to inflict the maximum amount of pain in the shortest amount of time. And that's why I was saying there is a point of no return where it does not matter how much pain you apply, the demographic collapse will have already happened. We're not there yet.
Well, plus also men need to realize that war has already been declared on them, whether they realize it or not.
Yep. And yeah, women, and I think they didn't realize, particularly back when they were doing this, that they were setting up institutions that were going to punish women. And I do believe that is what's happened. But the women are going to be the last to feel the pain of this. Because look, for guys, it's painful not getting married, particularly Christian guys.
Yeah.
Marriage is the gateway to sex in Christianity. So I understand that I am asking a lot of men to be voluntarily celibate.
Yep.
And I hate to say this, but men, that is our cross to bear. That is our sword to fall on. There's going to be a lot of men who don't have kids. And you know what? This is what I'm saying. This is why, and I'm going to keep harping on this. We can have, it'd probably take about at most 15 years, but probably less. We can have 5 if we really get going on this, up to 15 years. Okay? That's the pain. That's the pain period. And the men who come after won't have to suffer like this.
So, but the marriage strike is happening. It will increase. So for the conservatives who are fighting against the marriage strike, consider maybe not doing that and letting the pain happen sooner.
Mm-hmm.
Promote solutions to the strike, which does not involve scolding men. It involves changing laws.
You're going to have to vote. Women, you're going to have to band together with those greasy men, those evil men. And you're going to have to vote for things that are not in your interest. Now, I think people like Rachel actually would happily vote for things like ending universal suffrage. I think she's actually said that before. So it's not like there aren't women out there who are unwilling, who are willing to do this. There are. But the message needs to be focused on understanding that, really, sorry, ladies, this time you get to wear the scarlet letter. You're the ones who fucked up. You own this. And you're going to say, oh, well, but men let it happen. Oh, what? Cope if I've ever heard any. You voted for institutions. You voted for the welfare state. You voted for the judicial state. You voted for the police organizations. You voted for the laws that made this happen. And you outvoted the men. This one is squarely on your shoulders.
Yeah. You know what? Women are going to have to serve somebody, and they do. They do. You can serve the government,
Yep.
or you can serve your man. If you don't have a man and you choose to serve the government because that's where you're getting your benefits from, well, that's what you're going to get. You can't serve both the government and serve your man. Sorry.
Nope. Can't be done. And yes, as Elena's commenting down here, she's saying, I hate that good women will have to pay the price. Yes, good women will pay the price for this. Good men will pay the price for this. That's why we call it sacrifice.
Man, do you think we've stirred up enough trouble with this stream?
I hope so.
Oh, did you steer another hornet's nest, Steve?
It might not have been Steve. It might be my fault this time.
Oh, no, well.
I don't know. Somehow it's a combination of the three of us. We all take turns.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Like Nick and his RP morally good. That one. Oh man, that ruffled some feathers.
And the red pill descriptors are the problem. That one certainly stirred some problems.
Well,
some controversy.
Maybe it's my turn this time. We'll have to find out as we head into the holiday weekend here. Look, I would love to have a conversation with Rachel on this topic. I think that line of tweets that she was in was a big miss. But
and she's not our enemy.
She is. I was just going to say.
We love Rachel.
I was just going to say, but she's not our enemy. I think there's a lot of things we agree with her on. I think there's a lot of good we could do working together. But, that one, I'm sorry, that was a miss. And no, she did not prompt this. This was posted yesterday. We've been planning this one for over a week. So this was actually just something that came up as I was getting ready for this episode. But yeah, we are not going to be doing a stream on Monday. I believe more than one of us is on vacation and not available. So there wouldn't be a quorum to do a stream with anyway. And frankly, everyone is going to be out of town. So Monday's it's Labor Day, so we won't see you on Monday. We will be back on next Wednesday. Nick, you're up. What do you got for us?
Oh, so we won't have the ET on Monday, but it'll kind of be a combination, exposing the narrative and countercultural sexuality. We already did an episode on corn, so that'd be a good preview, good background to have to refresh yourself with. But we'll be talking about how is corn really the problem?
Ooh, I have some bookmarks in my Twitter feed for that too. I'm starting to.
None of us by any means endorse that. We're just
right.
Yeah.
We like to explore these issues because they are talked about. And corn is considered to be the main problem by many church people. So let's explore that, see if it warrants that label. Although, it is bad.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to. Any of us are going to say that porn is great. Actually, a little bit of preview. I think we're going to say something more along the lines of porn has become a weapon. So I think that should be enough of a teaser preview for you all out there for where we're headed with that.
For all three of you that listen to our stream and remember it, come the next week.
Right. Well, we have a few on coming in from Nick's Twitter tonight. So
but they may not remember what we said we were going to talk about.
Oh, because they're from Twitter, not from YouTube.
No one remembers something that's going to happen a week later. They just show up.
True. All right. Well, I think we've officially beat this topic to death. Any final words, guys?
Don't get married.
Yeah, actually, don't get married. And as much as I hate to say it, don't have kids, because you're just going to feed them to the system. So with that, we're going to miss you guys on Monday, but we will see you next Wednesday.
But